Finance Committee meeting for July. We are here live and online. So it's kind of good to be back and see everybody, even if it's from a distance. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. And the first thing I'd like to do is approve the June 2020 minutes.
So moved.
Okay. So do we need to second them? I mean, it's us three of them.
There you go. If you need it, I'll second it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to discuss today, we're going to go through just a review of the Grand Junction costs, financing, budgets and bids. And I think, John, are you going to talk about that?
John Neal has called in.
Oh.
John Neal called in or not? Yeah, called in. That was what we had to work in. John was going to call.
So maybe we'll have to come back to that one.
Yeah, we can. John Nail, are you there? Okay. Let's just come back to it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Are you guys good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. Well, let's go through the GO bond and sustainability plan that we had set for 6:30. We'll just move right to that. And is that John? Hey, this is good, man. We're like a test run for this.
Sounds like it.
Somebody's doing the dishes.
It's Kimberly, she's gonna be here to take minutes now.
Yeah, she's online.
Okay, Kimberly's on.
Yeah, she and Cindy are. Okay. Well, the test run's gonna have some bumps, right? It's like the first time my kid drove a car.
Mr. Chairman, at the conclusion of the meeting, there's no big deal, but I'd like to call for an executive session between the committee
Okay.
for some developments, and I just want to bring you up to speed on something
Perfect.
that's occurring, or not occurring, but might occur. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Let's talk about the GO bond and sustainability plan. Obviously, I mean, the city's been in discussion with, for the budgets and we've been talking about this to some extent. And I know some of us have been to some of those budget meetings. And John, are you going to do this piece? John Rogers or Todd or who?
Yeah, I can speak to it. As noted in our budget sessions that several councils attended throughout last week. Put that on. The general obligation bond strategy has been undertaken for the last, I believe, 5 years in order to keep the tax rate basically flat in the mid to upper 70s per 100. For the city rate is to then be able to capture the value of the increasing AV to fund certain supporting operations of the city. These instruments are set in 5 years, and then when they're paid off, it's in sequence based upon the need, about the bond size, and obviously is there enough growth, associated revenue to cover that debt. As you may or may not know, under the current funding system of the state, that as your AV goes up, your tax rate goes down. However, other overlapping taxing units can raise their rate. So in effect, the city as a taxing unit could leave money on the table, to put it, bluntly. So we've tried to use the GO bond strategy to fund certain capital purchases. And I believe we shared a schedule of what this next round would be, inclusive of some road projects, and yet keeping the tax rate, anticipated keeping it at its current 77 cents, plus or minus a few tenths of a cent. All that's impacted by what our final budget order would be, issued as a 1782 notice by the state in early January, or at latest, it's early January, typically issued in December. So that's the strategy we've undertaken. I certainly am well aware of the hesitation and the concern about that type of strategy, continuing it on. Happy to have that open dialogue and discussion in this chamber if you'd like. As I noted in our budget planning sessions last week, I'm all for working toward an alternate solution. My preference as the operational chief is not to just pull the plug in year one, give us time to react, because we have had this laddered out over a period of time.
Yeah.
So that's the GO bond strategy that we've had underway for at least the last 5 years.
Yeah. Todd, can I ask you a question? And even if we disagree on this stuff, on some of it, I mean, just so, I mean, really, for my understanding, like, when I look at the cash balances of what we have,
Yeah.
we still have $3.5 million in cash balances from the 2019 GO bond. There's still money in there, $440,000 from the 2018 GO bond.
Yeah.
There's $170 some from the 2017 GO bond. What, obviously it's a
Fair
loaded
question.
okay? But
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
just-
No, fair question. So I'll defer to John, because that's part of his daily duties of managing those cash flows and expenses.
Okay,
And Troy, those are simply projects that haven't taken place yet. So they were part of the GO. They're projects that haven't completed or haven't started. In some cases, it's just like, I think the 2018 is actually wrapping up a project in the Public Works Group, and it just hasn't wrapped up, so we haven't paid it. So so those dollars are sitting there waiting for them to use them.
yeah,
And that's basically the way the schedule works, is we schedule out, everything from fire trucks and police cars to, some road work projects or some culvert projects. Because we can, to Todd's point, we can manage the tax rate. We don't leave opportunity sitting there where instead of us receiving those funds, the county gets those funds.
yeah,
And so we're always making sure that we're getting as much out of that, of what you guys are paying into the process. We're getting as much back out of that as we can.
yeah,
And in this case, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing activity that hasn't taken place or isn't completed yet. And so those dollars are sitting there. They're identified to where they're supposed to go. They are not spent.
yeah.
So it's just not sitting there with no place to go just because we needed money. They have been identified. They just, that particular activity hasn't been completed.
This is going to sound like such a speech, right? So I'll just
Sure, go ahead.
preface that piece of it. But when we started talking about the weighted average cost of capital, and we started talking about all that stuff, when Greg Garitas was there, and we talked about the debt pieces, and I think Mike Johns was there as well. So I went back and I started doing a bunch of research, and I know this is going to sound like a novel idea, but I would agree with you that it appears that most places try to tax or try to debt themselves as much as possible to keep their tax rates up. From my perspective as a homeowner or something, I look at it and I say, and again, I know this is such a speech, but really nobody really listens probably anyways, or too many. But it's like I'm paying my house off every year. And instead, I'm borrowing on my home equity line plus 10%. Yeah. Because I want the write-off on my taxes for the itemized deductions. But at the same time, it's like, gee, many Christmas. I'm
You're never out of debt.
Yeah, I'm never out of debt. And I know I mean, so like, I'm torn by, by saying, hey, I get it, I get what, I do, I understand the tax rate, I hate it. I mean,
Well, if it helps, I don't know that I like it either. It's
Yeah.
just, we found a mechanism within the authorized system to be able to capture value of a growing community and fund those things in the supports of operations. So, as you and I have discussed, we know this, that if we accumulate too much cash, then the DLGF says, well, you don't need that tax rate, even if you're not borrowing money. So I clearly, I'm not advocating indebtedness, but it is unfortunately the system by which we're trying to operate in and be thoughtful. And so, again, I appreciate there's a financial view and a philosophical view that kind of cross over to one another. And if we work together in identifying how do we step away from this over time, that is a reasonable, I believe is a reasonable suggestion or strategy moving forward. And then we can absolutely do capital sinking fund, call it what you will, to have cash on hand to do those things.
That's what since it's for the public record, I will say this openly, and I've said this, Todd, man, I appreciate what you're doing, and I get it. If I was in your shoes, I'd be doing the exact same thing.
I think a lot of people would, yeah.
I mean, that's your job.
Yep.
Your job is to try to, from my shoes, I'm saying, gee, Merry Christmas, man. Why do we have to do this?
No, well, and bear in
I'd rather see
mind,
that capital.
this community, long before it was ever a town, was a deficit spend community. It had a line of credit to pay its bills with interest, get your property tax draws, pay that off, and it was a perpetual cycle. And until we did raise the tax rate, started accumulating operating cash. So it's not foreign to us, and certainly open to a different strategy that we can implement over time.
Todd,
Sir.
could you describe what that dismount strategy might look like?
Well, certainly we can look at the size of the upcoming anticipated GEO bond. We can look at as suggested by our financial advisor, a fire cum cap fund, which is still fed by tax pennies, tax rate. What is not in this statutory cadre of tools is a police cum cap fund. That's something we'd have to go lobby for. So you could, just like a park levy, everything's going to revolve around tax dollars and some sort of taxing strategy to accumulate to accumulate cash to fund those certain things.
But actually, we're being penalized for not being in debt. That seems kind of backwards
I think
to
that's
me.
a fair characterization. It's not an intuitive thought, but that's exactly, you're hearing it right now with another taxing unit that they have debt getting ready to fall off, and they're trying to, hey, let's keep our tax rate the same so we can, rebuild or remodel or whatever.
But ultimately, if we dropped it, there's a biased remark. My taxes would go down. Maybe I only save $100 or $50 a year, but my taxes go down, right?
Unless one of the other taxing units raises theirs on the
No,
circuit.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, his 1% though is still, we're still with all the tax needs for.
You have circuit breaker, you have tax caps, but it's always because the pie is only so big, and we reduce our slice, somebody else is going to increase theirs.
So if we're not the first hog to the trough, we're in trouble then.
Well, for years, we had a competitive kind of environment where the town/city and then the school corporation were kind of not doing a very good job of collaboration and communication. And we've, I think, bridged that gap, over time. From the operational side, certainly not any other form of referendum, but we do have that dialogue. I know John has a very open line of communication with their in-house financial director. So, yes, but I think it's the responsibility of all the overlapping taxing units, at least in this immediate area, to coordinate those tax rates to the best of our ability. So it's us and the school. Township is much smaller, lower level, as is the library, solid waste, and the county is like 27 cents. So rest assured, if we left, to put it crudely, if we left money on the table, somebody else is going to pick it up before it ever hits anybody's tax bill. as a reduction.
Well, they'd be the dog in the shed then, not us, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So if I can just jump in here very quickly, I appreciate, first of all, the explanation, and I understand the balancing act here. What I would like to know, and again, I recognize you can't answer this with any, with complete accuracy,
Sure.
but if this is not available to you, what are the implications? What other than the tax rate balancing act that we're trying to do there, how does that affect us on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so part of that is the obsolescence strategy of the police car fleet. Whatever apparatus that has been identified, and we've got that exploded kind of schedule that we can send you.
for the 5 million, you mean?
Yeah. So you've got vehicle purchases also in the fire department as a fire engine, and I don't know everything off the top of my head. And then some road projects, some road funding. So if you took all that away, those things would not occur.
Yeah, this is John Nail. Sorry for being late, guys. But I would just add on to that as far as projecting out some of these projects. John had mentioned that some of these projects we haven't spent the money yet. And part of that could be there's a variety of reasons why a road project may be delayed or accelerated, but it could be as simple as weather. If we have a rainy spring, contractor doesn't get started right away. There's lots of reasons why a road project may not be perfectly on target. It may be a few months delayed here or there. So I just wanted to add that color.
So I would say, is it realistic to think that in an ideal scenario, some of these funds that have been carried over from 2019, 2018, and I think even some go back as far as 2017, I think, is it realistic to think that with a smaller amount, again, kind of as Joe had put it, kind of a stepping off strategy, if we went with a smaller amount, if we went with the entire amount right now, there are going to be funds that carry over into, a couple years down the road because of projects like that. So a smaller stepping off strategy, I think, would be the very least we would want to look at.
This goes back to the whole, just like, not to bring up Grand Junction, but as I mentioned before, but it's like the whole, it's like the depreciating asset and then creating the fund so that in 20 years, maybe I'm dead and gone, my kids want to live here in Westfield, and now all of a sudden we're doing a $45 million GO bond to refurbish Grand Junction, the amphitheater. It's like we never get out of debt. And again, I know it's a state thing, right?
Largely, yeah. It's a system. It really is a system. That it's not unique. Obviously, you all know this. It's not unique to this community.
No.
And so, yeah, if there's a better way so what we would do, Councilor Fry, is look at the bond size we've kind of got identified, and maybe and I have to work with John and Jeremy, John Nail, and see how those projects would be funded as far as a time-wise, on a continuum of time, because you make a good point. There's obligated unspent proceeds on the books yet today. How do we ladder those out, and do we need to size the bond to its maximum level? Can we go 3 million at this time and then step away from it over time?
I'd like to see that. Because initially, just to put all my cards on the table, as you know, I'm against the 5 million.
Yeah.
I
had noticed.
Yeah. But I just rather see depreciating funds and capital replacement.
Well, and I think totally agree, and I think we need to see what that looks like from a global picture of, we start to amass a sum of cash, make sure we have it categorized the proper way so it is kind of protected. It's not looked as you, City of Westfield, have this war chest of cash. You don't need the tax rate, even without borrowing money, because they would say you need to spend that cash down. They're not incentivizing us to accumulate cash.
Yeah.
They're just not.
Yeah.
There's as you know, there's restrictions on where you can invest that cash.
Right.
There's limits to it. There's so many barriers on, and I never get into kind of a public or a political discussion, but, largely this is a red state, but they have so many barriers in place for us to be,
Fiscally conservative.
Bingo. So we can amass cash, but where do you put it? And how can you invest it? And so those are all limitations that are placed upon cities and towns that really are discouraging factors and elements to save money as far as cash on hand.
But to vote on this, I think the counselors are going to need the discussion that we have heard here, really.
Well, I think we need the
Yeah.
schedule too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think absolutely.
So
I wanted to jump-
we'll retreat. I think John Nail, are you trying to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. I mean, I think before we make that decision, I'd love to sit down with you guys with our resource allocation spreadsheet that we've worked really hard on to put together. And it identifies every road project in the next 5 years, how we're paying for it. And some of those projects are assumed to be as part of the GO bond. If we aren't taking out the full amount, if that's the direction we're going towards, let's sit down and sharpen our pencils and figure out what gets cut out, because something's going to have to give. And just to add additional detail, when we apply for federal funding for some of these projects, for example, East Street, the new extension through North Point, 161st and Union Roundabout, these projects are NPO funded, and part of that application, we make a financial commitment to the 20% match that we have to provide. And if we're gonna cut out some projects, those projects we've committed to matching are the last ones I want to get rid of, because it makes us look bad to the NPO because we've made a commitment and now we're backing out. So we need to sit down and really, and I'd be happy to share the resource allocation spreadsheet, walk through whatever needs to be walked through, but we need to make some decisions if that's the direction we're going.
Yeah, John makes a good point. I think that spreadsheet we shared early in the year, kind of how everything is programmed and laddered out. So I think as we mine through this, he does make a fantastic point that if we are to step back from certain projects due to lack of funding in that particular mechanism, what are the impacts? And as you as council know, that if a street has been identified to be built, repaired, whatever, and it's not, you'll know why. So you can respond to that. But to John's point, and I'll say it like this, and then we can move on if you so desire. Part of that 77 cents, as you know, is sitting in the budget sessions, is, I think, 3 pennies nearly, it goes towards motor vehicle highway. So property taxes do help fund transportation, and I would offer to you that the GO bond is yet part of that cadre of funding projects. Rather than over a 20-year period, we're compressing it into a 5-year period. And so that resource allocation spreadsheet, I think that is a worthwhile exercise for in-person, so you all have an idea. We do it here in a month, or you want to just pull individually, you let us know. You don't have to respond to that now. So
I think all the city councilors,
Yeah.
truthfully, somehow, so everybody can hear it.
sure.
I mean,
Because Veritas, he's the author of the sustainability analysis,
That's correct.
and he tells us that this is not reflected in our rate. I'm not sure I'm quoting him properly, but it certainly would be at some future time if we continued this approach, wouldn't it?
Well, the current GO bonds are reflected in that rate. You'll see an exploded view, general obligation bonds in that sustainability plan, but because it has to be funded by and backed by property tax dollars. So, as you also have heard, that in 2022 is when we expect to feel the effect of this economic downturn that we've identified today, but not yet the one that's lagging in the future, right? So, as you know, we have kept all of our operational budgets flat, so that will have some sort of cascading effect on other things, so there won't be enough necessarily existing operational dollars to fund some of these other things. So it's worth a deeper dive and a broader conversation beyond tonight.
I mean, I'm just speaking out of turn here, but one thing I would like to see with this, and just kind of put a note on it, is, I've gone back through the past budgets, and I don't know if this is the court treasurer's, or we'd have her do this, or you guys just make it a part of the budget then. Because, when you know, when the budget gets presented, I was here that last year when they did that. And, you know, the GO bond is not part of the budget as saying, hey, look, we have to do this for our cash flow. I mean, and I'm not railing on Andy or anybody like
Got
that, but you know, it's like, hey, look, we're cash positive. Well, yeah, we borrowed, you know, money.
True, but I would counter that we do have an operating balance that has accumulated over time by
Yeah.
unspent dollars.
Yeah.
This GO bond is borrowed money on laying on top of that. We're not operating off of that. I can argue back to myself, well, then you're not buying police cars and all that
Right.
other stuff out of it.
Right.
Understood,
Yeah.
understood. But at the same time, we are cash positive, and if we went away from the GO bond, we'd still be cash positive. We'd be buying these other things and renewing the obsolescence strategy and road projects.
I think for this council to look with favor on the GO bond, this is just opinion, because I'm not gonna, you know, call the roll on this thing, but we need to see some daylight at the end of the tunnel.
Sure.
Scott? Okay.
We're good.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anybody, anything else?
Not on that.
Okay.
John Nail obviously is on, so you want to digress to that?
Yeah, let's do that. So let's just go back to the Grand Junction costs, financing, budgets, bids, et cetera. And I think everybody got the one spreadsheet from the cost. So, John, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Have at it.
Yeah, so I'll do my best to fill in. I started with the city in April of 2018. So Jeremy pulled together some of the pre-2019 costs for this project. As you guys are aware, I mean, this project has been ongoing for 12 years now or something along those lines from when it was first conceived to today. So the pre-2019 numbers include certainly the design costs for the park itself, which was Land Collective and their design team, the right-of-way that was required to make way for the park along Park Street and Union Street, and then a major project that we did to make this area viable was the Mill Street Road project, which included a bridge structure and regional detention area, basically creating a weir and a for lack of a better term, a dam really, to hold back stormwater under short periods of time. You probably don't have to think too long ago to at the time when downtown flooded, when the old railroad levee broke. So this was to basically bring downtown out of a floodplain and make this park area viable. There's a lot of permitting that was involved in that as well. And that was what went on prior to 2019. We have the design in place, and we brought in a construction administrator to act as constructor for the project. That was Wilhelm. That process was RFP'd, and we did a round of interviews with the most qualified responders. Wilhelm was selected, and we put this project out to bid in the summer of 2019. Those bids came back higher than the original budget. We did have several cost estimations done prior to the bid, and I think it was a function certainly of some global trade issues at the time. That was part of it. But at any rate, we did some value engineering, and we are still in the process of value engineering with Wilhelm to bring that project back into budget. But the overview is I've broken out in the spreadsheet the costs from 2019 to present that we have spent, and then if you scroll down to the under contract future costs, those are costs that we are under contract with the various entities to pay out, but we have not physically spent those dollars to date. At this point, if there are any specific questions, I'd certainly do my best to answer those, but that's kind of the general overview of the spreadsheet itself.
Jonathan, I appreciate that. If you don't mind, can you just, because I don't know how many people are joining us just on the phone, can you give the subtotals for each of those categories you have that are on the screen now, prior to and then present and?
Sure, I can do that.
No, that's not what I want to do.
This includes Mill Street construction, right-of-way costs, and design costs. That total is $12.6 million. The cost of Grand Junction Plaza 2019 to present, that is dollars we have spent since basically at bid and to the point of construction we're at now. That total is $1.2 million. And then the under contract for future costs, that subtotal is $34.5 million. The biggest numbers of those is the $33 million remaining in construction costs to complete the park. At this time, we've spent a little under $1 million of actual construction dollars towards the construction of the park.
That's the way these projects go. I didn't vote for it at $40 million. I don't know what I'm going to do with $48 million.
Hey, John, so I know you referenced the 33 million, and I know our cash balance on hand right now is 33,432,000 or something, correct?
Troy, is that question directed at me or John Rogers?
Oh, I don't know. Anybody?
I believe you are correct.
Okay.
Correct. Fund on here.
So, I mean, we've heard some like rumblings on like the, with the, sorry, I'm having a moment here, the Moffett, or on the bid, the $500,000 bid, right? And if we said, hey, they had to have a minimum bid of X, but maybe they didn't do that, and there were some other differences or something like that?
No,
Or what?
they bid.
Thank you, Chris. No, they bid what they were supposed to bid on, and they met the minimum bid, and we accepted that bid.
There was no other land swap or anything like that?
No, sir, no.
Okay, so I wrote out a couple things I was trying to just remember. So one of the things, are we still on board with doing the skating rink and everything? I mean, is that, do we know?
That would be
John?
John Nail.
Nail? Sorry. Have we changed that
So
at all?
that was part of a value engineering discussion that's ongoing. The skating rink itself, I believe that bid package came in at somewhere around $2 million. And that was something that we looked at removing from the project and doing a temporary skating rink application for the time being. But that is part of our ongoing value engineering.
Scott? Sorry, I'm gonna put you on this.
Sure, no problem. I want to go back to the question regarding the land and the minimum bid, if that's okay. I just want clarification on that the minimum bid of $500,000, that was met. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
The minimum bid was $550, and that was met. I'm not sure what
Okay,
what the additional question is.
okay, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
comment earlier that the minimum bid was met, I just didn't know.
Yeah, the minimum bid was $550, and it was met.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Okay, so I know we're gonna jump around a little bit, because I was trying to look for all my notes. and John, or maybe I sent them to John Rogers, I sent some questions. I was trying to find my questions I sent. Did I send them to you?
One of us, are-
We tend to communicate, so. Your first question relative to Old Town and how they bid, there is no land swap.
Okay,
We have retained the old fire station that's not in that land purchase due to federal highway and NDOT and the preservation requirements there. So that's not, that tract is not in that cadre or that purchase. A portion of Grand Junction bond, 5 or 10% was supposed to go to the developer. I have no idea what that is.
okay,
That's, at best, is a bad rumor. That would have, that's just not, that is not accurate.
Okay.
The widening redesign of 32, essentially, your question was, are we paying for that? Are we cash flowing NDOT's expenses? So John Nail is our resident subject matter expert. Short answer, and I'll let him kind of expound upon that. We are not cash flowing NDOT's expenses. They are doing it. They're doing land acquisition, and so I'll pause on that notion, or that
Okay.
note, and John Nail can speak to how that partnership or that agreement works as far as the funding
okay,
of 32.
Yeah, so the interlocal agreement that we signed with NDOT for the State Road 32 project essentially states that it's a 50-50 split. The assumed cost of the project is $15 million. NDOT's putting forth $7.5 million. The city's putting forth $7.5 million, and that NDOT would be doing the right-of-way acquisition for the project. We believe that pending the final approved alternative, we got to start somewhere with a budget. We believe that right-of-way acquisition cost would be somewhere between $5.5 million and $6 million. That has to occur before construction can start. So NDOT will be doing that right-of-way acquisition, making the purchases of the properties, and spending that $5.5 to $6 million well before we put any money forward towards construction. So that they will be paying that amount, and then once that right-of-way is secured, we'll bring the project to a public bid. For argument's sake, hypothetically, let's say that the remaining, the actual construction cost then is $8.5 million. Well, then we would be paying our $7.5 million at the time that bid is accepted, and that would be paying their additional $1 million or $1.5 million to complete their $7.5 at that time.
okay.
John, if I might ask a question,
And back to the resource allocation spreadsheet. Yeah, sure.
the state is, excuse me, limited to spending $7.5 million on the project, I suppose.
That's
And
correct.
so if we go over, it's all ours. Is that the way it works?
That's correct. That's correct. I can tell you that when we put together that budget, we were certainly trying to be very conservative on that cost estimate. Right-of-way should be the largest portion of this project. We're talking about a half mile of road, and we're certainly believe that we'll be within that budget. I will point out that with respect to the other question that was posed, that budget that we put together is inclusive of sidewalks. It's inclusive of any underground utility, overhead electric being buried underground, those type of reimbursement costs. That's all included in the budget.
Can I ask you a question, just kind of on,
If I may, which
Yeah.
goes to your fourth question, that all those activities related to State Road 32 are not identified in the Grand Junction.
None of those are.
okay,
So it's in that $7.5 million that John just spoke to.
okay, that was the first thing I was just about ready to ask you. And then the second part is that, when we, when we put together this initial bond, and I say we, the city, the city council at the time, so we have 33 million. I got to imagine that, we gave ourselves some kind of wiggle room, right? If we don't do this skating rink or skate park or whatever it's called, or the 2 million, and we have this money, Man, to put, I really hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. So like what,
I'm used to it.
yeah, I know. So what, I mean, how much do you think that we're gonna have left over? I mean, we gotta have, surely, we
Well,
built
I
some
think
kind of.
John's probably better suited because this is one of his primary projects. There's been a considerable amount of value engineering. I mean, when the bids came back, I will share, because I just fly at a high altitude on this thing. We used a local, in the design phase, we used a local firm to kind of build a cost sheet. And just the cost of construction when it came back was just well outside the identified limits. So John and Jeremy and with our professional services have looked at value engineering things out of it, changing the density of the landscaping, changing, certain finishes. So, I mean, to what will be left over, I would have to defer to Mr. Nail on that just to give you an approximate what we're looking at. So we have looked at removing the ice skating rink. Yeah, we have looked at how do you downsize certain, components in an amphitheater and other, remove a bridge, things like that.
Okay.
So, but John, can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when the bond was put together, we were basing it certainly, just to backtrack a little bit, we had two separate estimation firms put together cost estimates back in 2017 for this project to make sure that we were on track. And those estimates came in at 28 and 29 million, right in that ballpark.
27.
So that was we escalated those costs for the year 2019 as best we could at the time, and that was the basis for the bond itself. When we actually bid the project, and a lot of this, I think a fraction, or at least a chunk of this, was related to some of the trade concerns at the time of the bid. But steel prices were really higher than I think any of our estimators could have anticipated. And so we were well over that original construction estimate, even escalated for 2019 costs. So we are trying to engineer this project downward to meet those bonding limitations. I'm certainly going to try and get this thing, as cost effective as possible, and retain as much money as we can from that bond limit. But I don't know if I have a firm answer for how much is going to be left over at this exact moment.
Yeah.
I think it'll be, I don't think there will be, to be candid, I don't think there's going to be a lot left over.
Okay, I have another question. Sorry, I don't want to hog the mic here. So,
You're good.
But there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, when all this COVID stuff was going on, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, where all these projects started getting rebid. I mean, because people were dropping off, and people were dropping construction projects by 15, 20% just because of what's going on. Nobody knew what. I mean, and I kind of alluded to that I think at the time. And, by saying, hey, we want to be good partners as well. But at the same time, going back to everybody and saying, hey, even oil costs are, $18 a barrel. I don't even know what it hit. I don't even remember. I should know that off the top of my head. But, again, you hate to be such a Scrooge, but at the same time, going back to everybody and saying, hey, guys, look at everything that's going on.
Yeah, and we received that same information, and I obviously got it from you and Councilor Willis, and that's something that we spoke about, and certainly those are opportunities we're willing to seize within the confines of public bidding and all those sorts of contractual obligations that we have. So I think there's always an opportunity to drive this cost down, but at the same time, how do we achieve as much of what was been conceived based on the limited resource or the maximum resource that we've got. So
Yeah.
I can assure you this is an ongoing iterative conversation as things are starting to mobilize there.
Yeah.
And I would take that a step further, Todd. If you look at the spreadsheet that I provided, the Finance Committee, you'll notice that I have a Wilhelm GMP 1 and 2. GMP stands for Guaranteed Max Price. That reflects the original first bid and a rebid of some additional packages. And if you'll notice, the bottom line, the last line in that section is Wilhelm GMP number 3. There's about $10.9 million there that we anticipate will be the final bidding that'll get us to construct the remaining portions of the park. That was strategic because we recognize that a rebid of some of these packages that came in really high, we could take advantage of some of these economic factors. So there will be another rebid of some select packages that'll be part of that GMP number 3, and I do think there's some opportunity that number is reduced some.
Okay,
I'd hope so.
that's good. Scott, Joe?
I'd just say when we started with this thing, the first one that came in was 27. John said 28. He was pretty accurate. Then when we voted, it was 40, and now it's 48. This thing's going to get by the catcher's mitt before we can catch it.
Well,
It looks like.
Council Edwards, you make a good point, and I can point to, not that this helps our issue, but State Road 37, there's been other projects, the Judicial Center expansion has come in way above, but they just haven't done it. So we were at a point where we're getting kind of down a path, but again, it doesn't solve our challenge, but it's not exclusive to us, as you've seen other public projects of much larger scale. So, in full faith in John and Jeremy to be able to try to drive this down, and, at the end of the day, we work together and, we eliminate other assets within the design, that's what we do. Or if you decide, well, we'll just plant grass and mow the hill, that's what we do.
And Councilor Edwards, I would
Don't give me
also
that
add
option, though.
It's always an option.
I would add that $27 million estimate was construction cost for the park.
Yeah.
That $27 million estimate was not inclusive of the Mill Street construction project, the land costs that went into the park, or the design costs, really. When that estimate came in at $27 million, that was for construction costs to build the plaza.
Okay.
That Mill Street project that we did, what was you have it shown here, that's between right-of-way and the actual cost. We're talking about $5-6 million for the Mill Street project, and to provide that flood mitigation for downtown. That was not included in that $27 million estimate from the beginning. We were asked to provide a full accounting of the project, and I thought, for transparency reasons, that project was was to bring the park out of floodplain, so I felt like it was important to include that.
I appreciate it.
that makes
I'm
sense?
not arguing with you, John. I know I lost. I was on the losing side on that. But-
Jonathan, I appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, I thought you were
No, go
done.
ahead.
I apologize.
I just think that we have to be cautious of what that would add. We've got some pretty not startling, but new type of construction in there. And in my mind, and I'm not running the show, but it's more important what happens after all this stuff is built than it's being built.
Yeah.
The operation of this thing is very, very important, and we've got to, we're going to have to really do our homework to operate it properly.
I think that's a good, not to keep moving on, but, I think that's like a good kind of headway into the next topic, which is, our total debt for the city. And kind of as we talked about the capital outlay piece, and man, one thing I would really like to see, over the next 20 years, and obviously, there's going to be other city councils way beyond me that are going to decide other things, but I would sure like to see a way that we are going to pay off, or at least create a capital outlay fund for Grand Junction over those next 20 years, so we don't have to issue bonds for our grandkids or our kids. Because, here in my speech again, right, and it drives me absolutely insane, Republican, Democrat, I don't care what, man. We constantly just perpetuate debt, forever and ever. And I get the state, it's a state thing, and man, I wish I could wave a wand and say, what the heck? Who came up with this stupid formula, right? But I can't. But it doesn't mean that I have to participate in the insanity of it either. So it's just, so with that being said, the total debt and schedules for 2025, I mean, John, and by the way, this is something, the debt piece, I think we ought to have, it's obviously not anything we vote on, but just something that we present to the city council in its entirety, because it sure would be nice that, as Scott Fry has said to me, is that, in 4 years we walk away and we have less debt than we, that we're actually paid down debt, so.
I did quarterly reports in the past.
Yeah, he's done that some.
I'm okay with doing that.
Thank you.
So, most of the information, we pulled together and
Again, this is, I would like to suggest at this point that, this is, everything that you guys have been covering this evening is really intertwined. And I know in the budget meetings, I've tried to kind of drive home that fact, but I want to be repetitive here and really drive home that fact. We have done a lot of planning. And just like John Nail said, we're 5-7 years out, this is where we put the stake in the ground. So if we start changing direction, that's okay, but there are ramifications, and I just want to make sure that we're communicating that, right? So
Yep.
that it doesn't appear that it's just a matter of saying we're just going to move from this pot of money and we're going to put some stuff over here and we'll do this and we'll move it over here. There's just a ladder of effect, a domino effect, I should say, that occurs once you start pulling out some of those pins. And again, I'm happy to sit down with any of you on an individual basis and go through that detail, but it is very interwoven.
Thanks, John, for what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just here to add value. That's my job.
So you won't necessarily, unless you want to go line by line on this particular exhibit, but one thing that I did mention in our budget planning sessions to each of you, and I may as well get it out here now, we can formalize our conversation in the future. The Public Safety Building on 32, the headquarters that house police and fire. It was built and then occupied in 1997. So you'll see on this schedule that debt is falling off. So to digress to our previous dialogue about the debt system of the state of Indiana, we've outgrown that building. It's reached a pretty good surface life, perhaps even beyond. We do have some roofing system deficiencies in the fire bays on the south side of the building. So we have, beginning even last year, undertook some professional services to explore what would it look like to remove the fire station, even privatize that land, turn it over into taxable land, remove the police station, move it more towards the core. There was this collaborative conversation about a school, township, kind of central office sort of thing. Do we put the police department there? So there's been a lot of exploration that has taken place. That hasn't materialized. So what we have done is stepped back and said, okay, if the police department, and it has grown considerably, there's 60, I believe 60 some officers. They occupy that entire building and remodel that. I'm getting some cost estimates. It's maybe $6 to $8 million. I have no idea at this point in time because we haven't really space programmed that for just the police department. Move fire out of that building to a location on Ditch Road that is on real estate that's already owned by the city. And then separate those the fire operations into two smaller footprint buildings, one on Ditch Road to service that portion of the district, and one up on land within the confines of Grand Park that would service Osborne Trails and Chatham Hills and that growth area, and of course Grand Park. So that is not obviously etched in stone. There's a lot of dialogue, but the debt of the public safety building does retire at the end of this year. So our strategy would be, as I've noted in our budget session, is to reconstitute that debt. It's, you know, it's a profane term, I recognize that, but to remodel the fire station and then also identify funding mechanisms for the public safety building to build 2 new fire stations. And that would build us out for the next 20-plus years. Now, that's a high-level, very fast explanation, but it does dovetail into this overall picture. Right now, your 77 cents on the 100 is approximately, I think, 3 pennies of debt for the debt service of the public safety building. So I've asked Greg Garitas, and we probably should convene maybe a workshop with him. He's laddered that out for timing and how it would impact the tax rate, given what we know today, and then maybe some scenarios of downturn, the growth of, you know, our community has been growing in AV 12% a year for the last 5 years. That's not going to continue. We know that. That's not sustainable. So that's a macro explanation of a very complex issue that it's not a new topic for the administration. It may be new to you, but it's been something we've been identifying at least 3 years ago, working up to this point.
Remind me again, if you don't mind, the time frame in the scenario you outlined?
Well, we would need to, if all goes according to plan, or we can agree, we would need to, as the debt retires in 20, re-up it in 2021. That would then identify the funding, get it in the taxing system, and then, you know, as far as construction deployment, that is yet to be identified. But
Okay.
we are quickly approaching, and if we don't, those 3 pennies fall away, as I've explained before.
County
So
gets it.
somebody's gonna get it. So I just want to, we don't need to really beleaguer that topic, it's just worth getting it out here on the record that we're gonna have to roll up our sleeves and make some decisions, not in the next 30 days or 60 days, but certainly soon. And I think it would be wise for us to sit with Mr. Garitas, as he has an exhibit. I think you might have it. If not, I'll make sure you do. Kind of just get yourself primed for how he's laddered this out well into the future. Maybe we stagger that. If we were able to afford that second new fire station, we would stagger that out well into the future, so it doesn't have this shock effect on tax rates or tax bills. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Todd, would you consider staying for the executive session with us?
sure.
Okay.
I think we're done. You guys have anything else you want to add? Anybody?
Anybody have any comments or?
Anybody have any comments? Anybody want to say anything? It's open mic night, Finance Committee.
It's kind of interesting, though. I
Is there
think we've
anyone
covered
online?
We've covered some ground.
That has any comments?
All right,
I don't know if you guys can hear me, Cindy,
Cindy, yes, we can hear you.
and I'm on a very big house road in Brookville, so I can barely hear. I'm sorry. But thanks you guys for having this meeting tonight.
I can't hear you.
I think she said thank you for having the meeting online.
Oh, if you said thank you, you're welcome. All right, with that being said, let's adjourn, and that's it. Thank you.